Winter melts away into spring. Spring ignites into summer. Summer smolders into autumn. And the coals of autumn are extinguished by the cold snows of winter. All things in this world revolve around the cycle of life, death, and renewal. That's the nature of existence. Try as you might, there's simply no stopping the cycle. Uncle Henry has entered that last stage of his journey. His journey through this big, weird old world of ours. And this fact filled me to the brim with anxiety. I couldn't imagine his absence from my life. It was incomprehensible to me that he would eventually exhale his last breath, and then he would be gone. On his end, Henry tried his best to settle into a new life in a new place. And he did a lot better than I had expected. I was half anticipating a barrage of angry phone calls from the director of the retirement community within the first few weeks, but Henry behaved himself. Didn't tell off any of the staff. He allowed the landscapers to do their work in peace. All in all, Henry adjusted pretty well for a crusty old farmer who wasn't used to being crowded by strangers. He liked walking down to the community center to socialize with the other residents, but he referred to their shuttle bus outings as taking the Oldie Express to Diaper Town. Instead, Henry took up lawn bowling, and he became almost obsessed with the card game cribbage. He spent hours researching strategies on his new laptop, squinting at the screen with a notebook and a pen at the ready. "I've been mopping the floor with these old fuckers," he told me with a grim smile. "They call me Hank the Shark down at the community center." "Hank the Shark," I repeated slowly, and I shook my head. "Henry, you're the only person I know who would move to a retirement village and immediately turn into a degenerate gambler. Don't drain anyone's retirement fund, okay?" "I can't promise anything," Henry grumbled sourly. "Nothing else to do around here except play cards and make myself some enemies. I can't drink anymore. They won't even let me smoke inside. A bunch of horse shit. Who the hell cares if I'm smoking in my own frickin' house? I live alone, for Christ's sake." It wasn't the first time I'd heard that particular grievance. I patted his head and I sighed. "Can't smoke indoors because you're an old fart with a memory like a housefly. You'd fall asleep mid-puff and burn the entire complex down." "Well, fuck you too," he retorted sourly. "Everything's changing, isn't it? I don't just mean my own predicament, I mean everything. Hardly none of it's for the better. Things just aren't the same anymore. Everyone's got their face glued to their smartphone. They're watching those stupid little videos and reading jackass opinions. I see you doing it all the time, kiddo. Don't try to deny it. People donate all their money to loudmouth dickheads so they can sit in their asses and stir the pot all day. Meanwhile, working folk can't afford to live anymore. I'll tell you something, when the ordinary people who keep this whole shit show running can't afford to live, it's a pretty good indication the whole thing's fucked beyond repair. I say we throw it all out and start over. This ain't gonna end well." I gravely shook my head and murmured, "No, it won't. Things are getting ugly out there." "It's all horseshit," Henry mumbled. "You're telling me these billion-dollar corporations, they can just piss down our backs, their chemical spill, their toxic pollution. Can't light a cigarette inside my own home? Good Christ, what a farce. In the world I used to know, kiddo, not even close." "No," I countered. "Maybe not. I'm glad you're still here with the rest of us, and you should be glad too." I tell you to fuck off already," Henry grunted. I laughed until there were tears in my eyes. Henry didn't laugh along with me, however. He wasn't joking. This isn't the world that he was used to. And he didn't much care for what was coming to replace it. His time was already becoming an echo of a faded memory. Shortly after Henry had moved into the retirement village, I started the process of querying literary agents to represent a collection of tales from Henry's farm. By the time December rolled around, I had only heard back from 2 of them, and both had declined to represent the book. Rejection's the norm in this business, unfortunately, but I was still pretty disheartened. They were good stories. They deserved an audience. I started doubting my skills as a writer. Was it my own fault? Did I fuck it all up somehow? Michelle tried to console and encourage me the best she could, but she didn't really understand my drive to get this work published as soon as possible. I wanted other people to read it, sure. Hopefully lots and lots of people, but I wanted Henry to read it even more. I wanted him to see his own words in print before it was his time to go. I wanted him to be proud of me. And even more, I wanted Uncle Henry to be proud of himself. If this story was one of those Hallmark feel-good movies, some up-and-coming literary agent would have agreed to represent tales from Henry's farm, resulting in a decent offer from a major publishing company, and in this squeaky-clean version of reality, the book would have rocketed to the top of New York Times bestseller list, and it would stay there for months. Henry and I would receive bags of money from our ecstatic publishers, and they all would live happily ever after. But this is real life. It's not a movie. Real life is messy, painful. Your hopes and dreams mean nothing outside your own head. In reality, I kept plugging along, making queries, hoping for the best, and time passed. Christmas came and went. Then it was a brand new year. More rejections, more queries. The occasional visit with an ever-declining Uncle Henry, colorful bird who was never meant to live in a cage. Henry lost interest in matching wits with the other old-timers down at the rec center, and he gradually became a shut-in. The last time I visited him, he barely looked away from the television. He was watching a 24-hour news channel without really seeing or hearing the talking heads on the screen. It broke my fucking heart, you know? Henry was a shell of the man that he used to be. A shriveled husk, no motivations or desires. He wasn't living, he was simply existing. And that was all. In March, I got a call from the retirement village. It was bad news. Housekeeping staff found Henry lying on the floor in front of his easy chair. He suffered a significant subarachnoid hemorrhage. In other words, Uncle Henry dropped from a massive stroke. As he crumpled to the floor, the space between his brain and his skull filled with blood, putting a dangerous amount of pressure on his brain. And gently, they informed me that Henry was in a coma. And it was unlikely that he'd ever become conscious again. Michelle wandered into the room as I finished the call. She saw the look on my face and immediately asked, "Is it Henry? What happened?" I cleared a hard lump in my throat and I croaked, "He's in a coma. It was a stroke. They said that we should get there as soon as we can." Quietly, Michelle murmured, "Oh my God," and gave me a tight hug. "I'm so sorry. Where did they take him?" St. Anne's, General. I'll drive. Let me just pop into the bathroom real quick first, okay? I'll be out in a few minutes. I barely even heard what she was saying. I was numb all over. She scurried into the bathroom, and I sat down on the living room couch to wait. I stared blindly at the TV, and I concentrated on holding it together. Obviously, I'd known that Henry wasn't going to live forever, but I assumed that we still had a few good years left before he died. This was all so abrupt. Cold. Boom, just like that. Uncle Henry was gone. He wouldn't live to see the book published. He might not even live to see tomorrow. His days of seeing and experiencing things were over. It was more than just heartbreaking. It wasn't fucking fair. Good people should be allowed to live a long, long time because good people are so tragically rare, aren't they? I mean, bad people are a dime a dozen, but good people are like diamonds in quicksand. They briefly shine and then they're gone forever and nobody cares. Sure, we remember the names of tyrants and madmen for centuries, but those who would make the world a slightly better place are so quickly forgotten. Beside me, Henry grumbled. Hold your horses, kiddo. I'm not gone yet. I gasped, what the fuck? And I slid off the couch in a state of pure shock. Uncle Henry had suddenly appeared beside me, looking pale and very, very tired in a hospital gown. Empty couch one instant, Henry the next. I almost had a heart attack. Henry grinned slightly at my expression and said, Don't shit yourself, okay? I'm not really here. I'm not at the hospital either. I'm somewhere in between. I stared at him from the floor and whispered, No, come on, man. That shit again? Henry threw back his head and let out a deep, genuine belly laugh. He nudged me with his white, wrinkly foot and said, I'm afraid so, kid. Listen to me, okay? Don't say anything. Just listen. It's my time to go. But some things hold me back. I don't know many of the particulars, but you have a job to do before I can move along. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. I stared at him mutely, my heart still pounding from the sudden adrenaline rush. Finally, I managed to peel my tongue from the roof of my mouth, and I croaked, I don't want you to move along, Henry. That's the last thing I want. Henry blew out an irritated breath and snapped, I think it's a choice. People die. Every single one of us dies. It's just how it is. Doesn't matter if you like it or not, it's a fact. My time's come and I need your help. You understand? I can't come back. It's done. Henry was right. No, I didn't like it. Not at all. And I sure as hell didn't want to accept it, but I knew Henry was right. We all die. All we can do is wake up every day and hope for the best. Everything beyond that's just whistling in the dark. Yeah, I answered finally. I wiped away a film of tears on my sleeve. I get it. Stop being such an asshole. I'm grieving over here. Henry patted my shoulder and slumped back into the couch. He looked exhausted. He sighed. I don't want to be an asshole. There comes a time when the hard truth needs to be spoken. Anyway, I know it all has something to do with you and the farm, and that's about it. I need your help to figure this out. Don't fuck around while you're out there, kiddo, because if I don't leave soon, I think I might be stuck here. I stood up and blinked down at him in confusion. Slowly, I said, Stuck where? Are you saying you'll be stuck in between? No, jackass, Henry snapped. I'll be stranded in fucking Florida. What do you think I mean? Look, it's not safe here, do you understand? Before the dead can move on, we have to leave all the bad things behind. Bad stuff stays in between. I crossed my arms defensively and I asked, when you say bad stuff, what do you mean exactly? Evil thoughts, horrible deeds, Henry answered quietly. The worst things you can imagine. I felt a stir of goose flesh rise up on my arms. I cast a quick glance down the hall and said, "We're going to be leaving for the hospital shortly, so make it quick. What do I need to do?" Henry shook his head in irritation. He grunted. "Aren't you listening? You're not heading to the hospital, you damn fool. You're going out to the farm." I sputtered. "Okay, fine. I'm going out to the farm, but what am I supposed to do while I'm there? What am I looking for?" Henry rubbed his temples and mumbled. "I don't really know. I have a feeling you won't have much difficulty finding it. The future may be silent, but the past is loud as hell." I slumped my shoulders into defeat and mumbled, "I hope you're right." Henry heaved himself to his feet and squeezed my shoulder. Quietly, he said, "I need to move on, kiddo. I'm tired. It's time for rest." As the last word left his mouth, I abruptly found myself standing alone in my living room. Henry was gone. I took in a deep breath and lurched down the hall to knock on the bathroom door. I wasn't sure how I was going to explain why I was going to drive out to the old farm instead of the hospital. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something real quick, okay?" I was met with silence. I knocked again and called her name, but there was no answer. I hesitated for a second, my heart suddenly pounding very fast in my chest. I started to say her name and I opened the door and it died on my tongue. The bathroom was empty. Michelle had closed the door and disappeared. I ran around the apartment calling her name with rising panic until I realized that Michelle wasn't the one who had disappeared. I had slipped in between, a place that's neither here nor there. I wandered back into the living room and flopped onto the couch. It felt real. I also felt real. But it wasn't exactly true anymore. I looked up at the ceiling and I demanded, "Now what? Do I drive there? Can you drive when you're in between?" I shrugged on my coat, pulled my hat snugly over my ears, and cautiously stepped out the front door. Instead of the carpet hallway outside my apartment, I found myself standing outside on a brisk March evening. I was at the farmhouse, shivering at the edge of the front lawn with a million stars blazing overhead. I said in a faint voice, "Guess I don't have to drive," and walked up the driveway. Henry had sold the farm to a couple in their early 30s. Their names were David and Corsa something or other, and I could barely remember what they looked like. What was I supposed to say to these people if they opened the door? I didn't even know if we were able to see each other. I snarled, "Fuck it. They can use a Ouija board," and rapped sharply on the door. The new owners had installed a doorbell, but I refused to ring it. The glowing button looked completely out of place on the old door frame. It was an unwelcome intruder, just like the new owners. Didn't belong there. A second later, David something or other opened the door and gave me a blank stare. He said, "Yeah, can I help you?" I had no idea how to even begin, so I took a deep breath and mumbled, "Good evening, sir. Nice night out, right?" He looked at me with open hostility. I stammered, "It's David. Right? I'm Henry's nephew. Henry's this, he's the old farmer who sold you this property. We've met a couple of times. Do you remember me at all?" David's eyes narrowed. He said, "Yeah, I suppose so," and folded his arms, glaring at me with thinly veiled hostility. "What do you want?" This wasn't going well, but I had no choice but to plow ahead anyway. I said, "Well, this is going to sound a bit odd, I suppose, but I'd like your permission to take a wander around the farm. I know this is a bit of an imposition, but I really need to do this tonight. Henry isn't doing so hot right now, unfortunately. He had a stroke, and they don't think he's going to make it. And before he went under, he asked me to go out here, and he asked me to My words dried up mid-sentence. I had just noticed that something appeared to be crawling out of David's ear. He gave me a strange look and said, "Oh, I guess you didn't hear about it. Well, before you go on any further, I should probably tell you something." His words seemed fuzzy and far away. I was too busy staring at the object that was slowly pushing itself out of his ear. It was fat, round, and pale as milk. David whispered, "I killed Cora. My wife. Happened a few months ago." I looked into his wide, glistening eyes and choked. What? You did what?" Can't even remember why it happened. She was in the kitchen. I came up behind her with my gun. She asked why I did it, but I couldn't give her an answer. I just shook my head and waited for her to die. I took a deep and shaky breath and quavered, "Your ear?" David ignored me as he plowed on. He said, "When she, when she stopped talking, I went up to the attic and I screamed for a while. Couldn't believe it happened, It was like, the hell did I just do? But it was done. Couldn't take it back. I didn't want to go to jail, so I hung myself from the rafters with my belt. I couldn't see another way out. I watched in a state of tongue-tied revulsion as the thing in his ear squirmed free and fell onto his shoulder. It was a long, white worm. David casually flicked it aside and said, "This is where the bad things are, kiddo. Henry doesn't belong here. He won't last very long." I took a big shambling step back and almost fell down the porch steps. I gasped, What do you mean? What'll happen?" "Be like a guppy in a fish tank," David said softly. "Sooner or later, he'll be eaten alive." He barked out a harsh gust of laughter and then slammed the door in my face, leaving me standing there on the front step with my breath pluming in the weak glow of the porch light. I realized there weren't any tire tracks in the crushed snow behind me. No one had pulled into the driveway for a good long while. In the gloom just beyond the glow of the porch light, someone said, "Don't let him rattle you, kiddo. Go on inside." I turned to see Henry strolling up the porch in his hospital gown. It somehow hung motionless in the cold, stiff breeze. In a grave tone, Henry said, "Doubts and fears can take on a life of their own, but none of that can hurt you. Not if you don't let it happen." I groaned. "I don't know, Henry. I seem to recall walking away with some pretty decent bruises last time. Not to mention the nightmares." Henry flapped his hand dismissively and snorted, "Nightmares are a dime a dozen. Good dreams, though, that's different. Good ones are priceless. Forget the nightmares, cherish the good ones. They can get awfully scarce." Henry swung open the door and gently steered me inside. "Go on, dragging your feet isn't gonna make it go away." The mudroom was dark and empty. I flicked on the light and saw the new occupants had torn down the old wood paneling. They had painted the walls a light, airy shade of blue instead. I hated it. It was all wrong. It looked and smelled different in here, and I didn't like it one bit. I pushed through the door into the kitchen and was greeted by gloom, dust, and silence. The house was ominously vacant. David and Cora, something or other, appeared to be long gone. I reached out and flicked the light switch on the wall. The overhead light revealed a faint maroon-colored stain on the floorboard in front of the sink. I stared at the stain on the floor and thought, "Oh, fuck, that doesn't bode well." I cleared my throat and tried an experimental, "Hello? Is anyone here?" I was answered by a flat, damp echo of my own voice bouncing back from the barren walls. It seemed that David and Cora had moved in, performed a large number of home renovations, and then disappeared in a span of less than a year. What happened? I eyed the bloodstain on the kitchen floor and muttered, "Murder. That's what happened." I wandered around the main floor and turned on all the overhead lights. At the foot of the stairs that led to the second floor, I paused and listened intently as I peered up into the darkness above. I called out, "Look, I'm not here to play Ghostbusters or whatever, okay? Believe me, I don't want that. I need to help Henry move on." I was answered by a strangled, gurgling cry from the upstairs bedroom. It was followed by a string of desperate gagging sounds. I grimaced and reluctantly started climbing the staircase. The horrid gagging sounds grew more frantic by the second. It was like someone was trying to scream with a lungful of water. The racket seemed to be coming from the upstairs bathroom. I fumbled with the light switch and illuminated the second-floor hallway with the weak glow of a single overhead bulb. I walked up to the bathroom door with leaden feet and called out, "Is someone in there? Hello?" The gurgling fell silent. I hovered indecisively for a moment, then took a deep breath and opened the door. The smell hit me like a punch in the gut. It was awful beyond description, a stomach-turning blend of sulfur, rotting flesh, and hot sewage. Pallid light spilled in from the hallway, revealing a large man gasping for his life on the floor. He was on his hands and knees, a stream of dark fluid pouring from a gaping wound across his throat. A straight razor lay on the spattered tiles near his hand. The dying man stared up at me with wild, rolling eyes, and he tried to speak. A dark sheet of foul liquid oozed over his lips and drooled down his chin. He reached out with a trembling hand, and I instinctively moved away from his touch. His skin was a mottled patchwork of purple and blue. He looked like a corpse. The ghastly specter started crawling at me, gagging on its own blood as it tried to speak. I skittered away from it, an involuntary cry of disgust on my lips, and I slammed the door shut. I fled down the hall and took the stairs 2 at a time. I stopped just short of bolting out the front door and forced myself to breathe for a moment. I was pretty sure that I just witnessed the last moments of the unfortunate Willie Van Klein, Uncle Henry's former neighbor. According to Uncle Henry, poor Willie slipped into a downward spiral when his oldest boy died in Vietnam, culminating in the unwitting release of a supernatural horror upon the world. In a final act of madness, he cut his own throat in a blood sacrifice. I told myself it was just a story, but I knew better than that. When you slip in between, the concept of reality becomes entirely subjective. Restless spirits reside there, wandering among the dreadful compulsions and unimaginable terrors. I turned away from the door and shouted into the empty house, "What the hell am I even doing here?" I waited for a response, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was empty and silent as a tomb, but I knew I wasn't alone. Finally, I threw my hands up in exasperation and snarled, "Okay, sure, that's fine. I don't have a fucking clue what I'm doing here, but it's just fine. I'll keep looking around, how's that?" From the kitchen, a rough, slurring voice shouted back, "You should look for a pair of balls while you're at it, kid. A pair of balls and a goddamn spine." My stomach dropped into my feet, and my breath caught in my throat. I knew that voice. I knew it all too well. 20 years after his death, that hoarse, boozy growl still haunted my dreams. It was my dad. Not too long ago, I had banished the remnants of his Odie's presence in this world with the swing of a shovel. But now I was in between where the bad things are. Dear old Dad came staggering out of the kitchen and fixed me with a baleful gaze. His eyes were bloodshot and feral beneath the heavy shelf of his brow. He was blackout drunk and almost crackling with aggression. Dad had a bottle of rum in one hand and he was carrying a shovel in the other. He pointed at me with the shovel and said, "Had to dig ourselves a couple of holes tonight, boy. One's for Henry, and the other one's for you." I fought the urge to run. Instead, I took a step forward and said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The jagged flutter in my voice told a different story. I was very afraid. Whenever my father had fallen deep into the bottle, he would always become filled with black, murderous rage. He'd killed many people during the war, and I believe he may have started to enjoy it after a while. After the war was over, he killed at least one more unfortunate soul in a drunken road rage incident. As you may recall, the body was buried in Henry's root cellar. At Henry's request, I dug the victim's remains and I disposed of them in a bonfire. And I had exhumed the mummified corpse with the very same shovel my father was holding in his rough, calloused hands. Dad slowly shook his head at me, his lips curled down in disgust. He said, "I always told your mother you'd grow up to be a sissy, but she wouldn't listen. I told her that you'd never make her proud, and I was right. What have you done with yourself, sissy boy? What'd you ever do to make your mother proud?" I croaked. Nothing. And I felt tears sting my eyes. He grinned and shook his head again. "Nothing," he echoed. And he took a deep swig from the bottle. "Look at you. Sorry little shit stain. Look at you. Cowering in front of another man with tears in your eyes. This is what your mother brought into this world. Crybaby sack of shit right there. Your existence is a sin," I whispered. "You shut the hell up. You aren't any better." Dad narrowed his eyes and leaned against the shovel. He said, "Let me tell you a story real quick, Mr. Writer Man. You like a good story, don't you?" I wiped my eyes and said, "Nope. I don't have to listen anymore. You're gone." Dad grinned and shot back, "Then who the hell are you talking to right now, stupid? I ain't gone. I'll always be alive in your head, boy. I ain't going nowhere." An unexpected jolt of fury shoved my fear and grief aside because the malignant son of a bitch was right. Bad memories fade, but they never disappear entirely. I can make peace with myself and move on, but I'll never be able to erase him from my past. I bellowed, "Get out of here!" And I lunged for the shovel. Dad yoinked it out of my grasp and belted me across the side of the head with a bottle. It exploded in a shower of glass, and I hit the floor with blood running down my face in a crimson curtain. I tried to sit up and was promptly shoved onto my back with a muddy work boot. Dad said, "There ain't no rules in a fight. There ain't no rules in life, neither. And there sure as shit ain't no rules in death. You should head back to the other side and forget about Henry. Can't help him move on. You can't do nothing right. Nothing at all. It ain't no fucking good." I groaned. "Still better than you." But I was talking to an empty room. He was gone. I struggled to my feet and my hands clenched into fists. But there was no one to fight. I had a phantom ache in my skull where the bottle had connected, but the gash in my scalp had vanished, along with all the blood. Dad had disappeared into the background miasma of this bizarre reality, a place and time which were neither here nor there. For now, it was just me. Me, in an empty house, whatever horrors my subconscious might summon up next. I looked around and mumbled, "Oh, fuck." I had no idea what to do next. At that point, I was afraid to do anything at all. I rubbed my temples, let out a defeated sigh, and said, "Okay, well, here goes nothing." Bracing myself for disaster, I closed my eyes. I started walking blindly across the living room, using my extended arms as feelers as I let my feet take control. Why not? It was a good plan as anything else. I opened my eyes and I found myself standing in the kitchen. David and Cora had painted the walls a sickly shade of yellow. I shook my head and grunted, "Looks like shit. Now what?" I closed my eyes, spun around a few times, and resumed my blind search for my surroundings. My hand brushed against something cold and hard, which turned out to be the brass knob on the back door. I decided I could use a breath of fresh air anyway. Willie Van Klein's decaying corpse stench was still lingering deep in my sinuses. Maybe a blast of cold air would clear my head. I swung open the door, and there it was. Towering high above the frozen fields in the moonlight, it was Helmut Schneider's cross, a looming monstrosity that had rotted and eventually toppled beneath its burden of human misery. I gaped at it in disbelief. It was possibly the ugliest thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was easy to understand why all the neighboring farmers had all turned against Helmut and his followers. The thing wasn't just an eyesore, it was nothing short of completely fucking horrifying. My boots crunched against the snow as I gingerly made my way down the back steps, clutching the railing so I wouldn't slip and crack my tailbone. I couldn't take my eyes off the cross. It was a monolithic tribute to an unforgiving master, an arduous project that served nothing but the darkest desires of an otherworldly evil. I stood in the barnyard beneath the stars and stared at the behemoth with equal parts awe and loathing. I could actually feel that it wasn't right. It was radiating a feverish aura of oppression, madness, and bloodshed. "Ugly fucker, isn't it?" Henry asked. He was suddenly standing beside me in the yard with a grim look on his face. "You know, Helmut sired a lot of children with his wives. I imagine his bloodline still exists. His evil trickle its way down the family tree. Yeah. Where are they now, these people? Any of them speak to demons in their dreams?" I snorted. "Well, I sure hope not. Didn't all that die with Willie Van Klein? Isn't that why he, That was part of it, yeah," Henry answered gravely. "But I also believe he just didn't want to be alive anymore. I suppose the booze would have gotten him eventually, but the other way was faster. Almost a two birds, one stone situation. Hell of a thing. Sometimes how it goes, doesn't it? Two wrongs can make a right. Nobody comes out clean, that's for damn sure." We stood there for a bit, looking out at the monstrous cross in the distance in silence. I could see my breath, but I couldn't feel the chill in the air. I felt like I was trapped in a dream. I didn't know how to wake up. "Well," Henry asked hesitantly, "guess you haven't made much progress yet. What happened? You don't look so good." I rubbed my eyes and muttered, "Yeah, so I got here just by stepping out my door, right? And right off the bat, the dude who bought the place tells me he committed a murder-suicide, so I'm guessing it's been a few months since it happened. Did you know that?" "Oh, shit," Henry said faintly. "No, I didn't see anything about that in the news." "Yeah, me neither." And then I went upstairs and some gross shit was going on in the bathroom. Ran back downstairs and guess who ended up breaking a bottle on my head? Just guess. Now I'm about done with this shit. Henry held up a hand to shush me and pointed into the darkness. He said, "You see that?" Something was moving on the icy barren fields. My straining eyes registered a stealthy advance in the starlight, smooth and deliberate. A number of figures were visible against the patchwork of dirty white snow in the distance. There were at least 10 of them, maybe more. Softly, Henry said, "In the house. Right now." I took a step back and stammered. Do you see that? Looks like they're not touching the ground. They're not even..." Henry roared, "I said get inside!" and shoved me towards the house. He disappeared with a soft whooshing sound, and I ran for the back porch with an agility of sudden terror. I slammed the door and engaged the deadbolt, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what was going on out there, but it was definitely bad. I took a stealthy peek through the window and saw a group of disturbing figures entering the barnyard. The intruders appeared to be wispy and emaciated. They're all dressed in tattered rags. I thought they all looked like they're dead, they looked like zombies. The group drifted apart and surrounded the house in a wide circle, their bare feet never making contact with the ground. They gazed at the farmhouse with hollowed cheeks and sunken eyeballs. It seemed like they were waiting for something, but What was it? Me. That's what they were waiting for. If I tried to go back outside, I'd be swarmed in the blink of an eye. I was trapped inside until the light of dawn. A horrible, dreadful thought crept into my head, and I felt a flutter of panic in my guts. I looked around at my empty surroundings and called out, does morning come when you're in between? Hey! Henry? Anybody? Come on, man, give me a break over here. I started to pace around the living room in a state of high agitation. I wasn't sure if time flowed at the same rate on both sides of the fence, but I knew that Uncle Henry couldn't hold on much longer. Whether I succeeded or failed, Henry would soon die on the other side. If he died before I could help him, Henry would be trapped in this off-kilter, nightmarish version of reality. I looked to a blank wall and begged, give me a fucking sign, man. Show me where to go. Come on, I don't know what the hell I'm looking for. For Christ's sake, give me a sign over here. From somewhere far above my head, a man started to scream at the top of his lungs. It froze my blood and made my heart skip a beat. At first, he was just wordless, anguished screaming, and then he started to wail. Get out of my head! Shut up! Get out of my head! The sounds were too muffled to be coming from the second floor. The unknown screamer was up in the attic. He repeated the sentence over and over, kicking the walls, stomping up and down the floor like a toddler, having a screeching meltdown. After a minute or two, the wild screaming tapered off into hoarse shouting. And then there was nothing but ominous silence. I shuffled over to the staircase and considered my options. I wasn't looking forward to whatever was waiting for me in the attic, but every corner of that old farmhouse harbored a restless spirit or two. Memories of the very personal ghosts of your past experiences, and they haunt the mausoleum of your heart until the day you die. And then you become a ghost. I murmured out loud. I trudged up the stairs with leaden feet. Thankfully, the bathroom door was still closed. I had no idea if Willie Van Klein was in there or not, but a strong hint of his putrid essence was lingering in the air. I had no intention of finding out. Fuck that. If I had to take a leak, I'd do it in the laundry room sink. I flicked the switch of the attic light and pulled down the trap door. It swung open with a low groan, releasing the ladder with a rustled squeal. I looked up into the dim glow overhead and thought, it's gonna be that David guy, isn't it? I mean, he killed himself up here. I mumbled, only one way to find out, my man. And forced myself to climb up into the attic. Heroes aren't always less fearless and brave. Sometimes heroes are very afraid. All they want to do is run away. But they don't run away. And this is what makes them heroes. As it turned out, I was right. It was David something or other, in all of his dangling, purple-faced glory. He was hanging roughly 18 inches below one of the rafters by his neck, and his eyes were open. His lips were twisted in a malignant little smile. He said, "When the noose went tight and cut off my hair, I immediately changed my mind. But it was too late. I tried hard to save myself, but I couldn't get free." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but it wasn't working. I closed my eyes and asked, how can I help Henry move on? What am I looking for? David made a shooing gesture with one of his blackened hands and said, "Let's get out of here. You don't belong. You're not dead yet." "Neither is Henry," I replied patiently. We stared at each other for a while. David's grin faded, and he sighed. Why don't you look inward? That's where you'll find your answer. Oh, don't look at me like that. I'm a ghost, not a therapist. I snapped. Can you be more specific? Because that doesn't tell me anything. The hanging corpse rolled his eyes. He sneered. The living are as dense as brick. You already know the answer. My whole body stiffened for a jolt of anger and my hands clenched into fists. I glared up into his bloated, purple face and barked, No, I actually don't know the answer, which is why I'm asking you what the hell I'm supposed to... I realized I was arguing with a dangling corpse. I stopped talking. David gave me a mocking grin and crooned, Guess he won't be moving on then. Fail yet again. I bellowed, Fucking what? And punched him as hard as I could in the stomach. The leather belt creaked as he swung backwards. His smug expression didn't change, and that infuriated me even more. I tore into him with a barrage of punches, swinging as hard and as fast as I could. I hit him until my knuckles hurt and I was out of breath. When I was done, I collapsed to my knees and panted like a dog on the dusty floorboards. Still twirling and swinging around his neck, David giggled at me and said, You feel better now, idiot. Can't hurt me. I'm not real. None of this is real. You've been talking to yourself this whole time. You haven't been listening. Once again, I abruptly found myself alone in the empty room. My hand still hurt, but the pain was a distant murmur. A ghost, if you will. I stood up, gingerly flexed my fingers, and said out loud, Am I losing my fucking mind? Henry stepped out of the gloomy corner of the far side of the room. He crossed his arms angrily and said, I hate to be a nervous Nelly, but I can hear him talking about shutting off life support. You're not going to do anything just yet, but you should probably hurry the hell up and get this figured out. I stabbed the air between us with a stiff finger and snarled, Well, they can just slow the fuck down over there because no one's making any decisions yet, not without me. Henry sighed deeply and put a hand on my shoulder. Gently, he said, I already arranged all that a while ago, kid. If they take me off life support and my ticker stops, it's over. I'm a DNR. Do not resuscitate. I stared at him in dismay. I sputtered, What the fuck, Henry? You never told me about that. Why didn't you? Because I didn't have to, he interrupted. And I shut up. Henry squeezed my shoulder and looked me in the eye. I could see how diminished and tired he'd become. He was so dreadfully tired. I can make my own decision. It's my life, it's my death too. You have no right to dictate how or when I pass on. Like I said, they're not going to do anything yet. At least not until you get there, but you have to understand that I'm gone. No coming back from something like this. I walked away from him and gazed out the window. From my vantage point, I could see a few of the undead creatures standing motionless in the yard, standing, guarding against my escape. Beyond that, Helmet's Cross loomed high in the sky, rotting away in the frozen moonlight. I swallowed back a lump in my throat and said, Trying my best, Henry. I've been trying really hard to accept your situation. I've also been trying like hell to get your stories published before your situation gets worse, and now I'm trying to understand all this other bullshit, and I just... I'm pretty lost over here, you know what I mean? I'm fucking lost. Oh, hell, everyone's lost, Henry chuckled. You're definitely not alone. Listen, I'm not gonna lie to you. I can't make it any better. Wisdom isn't magic, it's just experience. All I can say for sure is the sun will rise tomorrow. And it'll rise again the next day, too. So, quit belly aching. Let's figure this out. I'm trying to die over here. I turned back to him with a look of shock, and Henry mimicked my slack-jaw stare with wicked precision. I started to laugh, and he started to laugh along with me. We laughed. We laughed until there were tears in our eyes. Henry gave me a clumsy side hug and said, "I got a question for you. Why do you think the bloodsuckers are waiting outside? Because this place is a horrible garbage heap in the fabric of reality?" "Yeah, it sure is," he agreed. "That didn't really answer my question. What are they doing out there?" I gave him an irritated glance and said, "Isn't it obvious? They're making sure I can't leave." And suddenly, there it was, staring me in the face with a 100-watt glare. My eyes widened in shock, and I looked over at Henry, but he was gone. It was just me and my baggage, trapped between the walls of my own devising. I was the one holding him back. It was me. Henry had been my rock throughout my life, and he'd always wanted the best for me. If he could have done so, Henry would have reached into the sky and given me the stars, but he couldn't do that. So he taught me how to reach for them myself. And he was always there to catch me when I soared too high and fell back to earth. But now he was tired, and it was time for him to rest. I found myself standing on the back porch. The gaunt apparitions in the yard drifted closer, their eyes glinting with hunger, and I walked right past them without a second glance. Ghosts and memories, both are nothing more than echoes of the past. They have no power of their own. They can only hurt you if you allow them to take control. I left them behind and kept walking, looking only forward as I marched away from the farmhouse. I crossed into the frozen fields and headed for the dreaded cross. As it loomed closer, I gradually became aware that I was walking on concrete. Michelle was at my side. We were at the hospital, shuffling across the parking lot to the main entrance. I could still hear the faint moans of the undead behind me. I ignored them and I kept walking. Michelle's hand was firmly gripping my own, and the entrance of the hospital was drawing ever closer. Michelle asked me if I needed a moment to compose myself, and I shook my head and picked up the pace. For a very long time, Henry had been my light. But every shooting star must burn out and go dark. It was time to let him go. The funeral service was absolutely packed. All the seats were taken and people were standing 3 deep in the back. It appeared that every distant family relation had shown up to pay their respects, along with a large number of friends and acquaintances. I didn't recognize even a quarter of the people who attended the service. Henry's light had illuminated many lives. He was a good man. One of the best. And I'll miss him very much. After the service, I stood outside and chatted with people as they drifted out the door. A number of strangers came over to introduce themselves and offer their condolences. One of them was a large, middle-aged man who looked vaguely familiar. He said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I was Henry's neighbor down the road when I was a kid. My name's Aaron Van Klein." I did a double take and gasped. "Wow, I mean, yeah, thanks so much for coming. Henry was a hell of a guy. Guess he tried his best to help my dad. My mom always really liked Henry, and your aunt, she always spoke highly of him. Once again, I'm sorry for your loss. I gave him a polite nod and said, well, thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Of course, Aaron said somberly. They moved along. I turned to the next person in line without really looking at them. I was getting tired. All I wanted to do was go home and lay in my dark bedroom. I stuck out my hand and muttered, hi, thanks for coming. An elegant southern drawl responded, saying, thank you for having us, dear nephew. It's good to see you again, despite the unfortunate circumstances. How have you been, sugar? I snatched my hand away like it had been burned. It took an involuntary step backward. It was none other than Henry's half-sister, Delilah, mysterious and forbidding in a long, black dress and matching veil. Diego stood beside her, looking large and sinister in a black trench coat and mirrored sunglasses. He nodded to me and said, my condolences, homie. Your uncle had a pair of big brass balls on him. I respect that. I heard about the unfortunate incident after the farm changed hands. Delilah purred softly. Such an awful tragedy. It's currently on the market again. Just say the word, sugar, and it's yours. Auntie Delilah will buy it back for you in a heartbeat. I could tell how much you love that place. It's the least I could do. Thank you, I said stiffly, but that's okay. I don't want it anymore. It's history now. I'm trying to live for the future. That's very wise of you, nephew, Delilah agreed. Well, if you ever need anything at all, just find one of my people and let them know. My organization keeps expanding. I have acolytes just about everywhere these days. I thought about the store clerk with the serpent tattoo on his hand, and I tried to suppress a shudder. I gave her an awkward smile and said, yeah, I bet you do. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind. After Henry was interred in the cemetery, the more immediate family headed to the church basement for a reception. We ate sandwiches cut into wedges and other funeral classics. We all chatted amongst ourselves as if we hadn't just lowered a loved one on the ground. I excused myself from a miraculous conversation with a gaggle of aging aunts. We found a bench outside. I sat down and looked out at the graveyard next door. I didn't feel like babbling about nothing. I just wanted to exist for a while. I felt eyes watching me and twisting around in my seat. It was several of my young nieces and nephews, uncomfortable in their funeral clothes and bored out of their minds. I said, "What you guys doing?" One of my nieces gave me an exaggerated shrug. "Nothing," she groaned. "There's nothing to do. Aunt Maggie says we're not allowed to play tag in the churchyard." I nodded sadly and said, "She wouldn't let me play tag at funerals either. She'd yell at me and grab my arm." "She's mean," my niece muttered sourly, and she kicked a rock with her little buckled shoe. "She always yells." I motioned for them to gather closer, and I said, in a conspirator's whisper, "I ate too much fruit salad at a wedding, and I threw up on her shoes. It was really gross. She ran away and cried in the bathroom." The kids stared at me in surprise, and they all started to giggle. The youngest boy plopped himself down beside me and said in a grave tone, "Uncle Henry said a lot of swears. He smoked cigarettes." I smiled and said, "Yep, he did both. He's from a different generation." "What's a gen-nation?" he asked suspiciously. "Smoking's bad. He was a bad guy." I laughed a little and said, No, Henry was a good guy. He was a little rough around the edges, but he was a good guy with a lot of great stories." My niece perked up immediately, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. She asked, "What kinds of stories?" I gave them all a stern look, and in a low voice I said, "Scary stories. You wouldn't like them." The youngest boy jumped off the bench and hollered, "Would too! I love scary stories!" The rest of them chimed in with a chorus of, "Me too!" And they all crowded around me in an excited knot. I saw a reflection of my own youthful exuberance in their animated little faces, and my heart hurt a little in my chest. but it was a good hurt. You know what I mean? It was bittersweet. Like a beam of golden sunshine peeking through the clouds after a violent storm. It would take some time, but I was going to be okay. Are you going to cry? An older nephew demanded in a brash tone. Because I don't want to see another grown-up cry today. I grunted. No, Mr. Bossy Pants, I'm not going to cry. Okay, everyone. Sit your butts down in the grass and I'll tell you one of your great Uncle Henry's stories. There was a chorus of cheers, and they arranged themselves into a semicircle with only a minimum of pushing and bickering. They looked up at me with guarded wonder on their faces. They were ready to believe, but only if the story was good enough. Well, I drawled slowly. I'll start by pointing out this is a big, weird old world. But we really don't know jack shit about it. You swore! The little guy piped up indignantly. He was violently shushed by the others, who urged me to continue. I leaned in close and warned. The story's pretty scary. You all sure you want to hear it? They all nodded yes, their eyes now blazing with excitement, and I let the story take me where it wanted to go. It began with Henry's words. But before long, my own voice took over the narrative. The magic was now my own, and I could use it to take people away from themselves, if only for a little while. I could use it to guide my own future. At long last, I could be free. For those of you guys that like getting cozy while listening to stories, I want to let you know about Etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. That's my wife's tea shop. She sells hand-blended teas. There's creepypasta-based teas if you want to get one that's a flavor that you like, or there's MrCreepyPasta tea, which happens to be a tea that I drink fairly often. You can also ask for a dabbing sticker. If you ask her for a dabbing sticker, you get a special one that I made for her to use on that jar, and she told me not to use it. So I like telling you guys to go ask her, because then you get a special one, because then she's forced to admit that I made a really good concept, even though it's very silly. Etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. A big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Jordan Humble, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Emma, Brenna, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante, Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, Bastion Beefcake, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yargul, Clownable, Amber Clark, Jay Kearns, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Himbo Jerry, Crusader Chocobo, Adamarius, Estebean, Nate Cull, Our Minsect Time, Xylobones, Angelus, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Lebeda Galvin, That Creepy Chick, Red Shadow Cat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Ika Limchok, Dirty Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Fikamel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Darth Miver, Sashi Suzaku, Coconut 509, Stricket, Freddy Krueger, Lisa Cottrell, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Mog, Kiwi the Sloth, Fester's Lampshade, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for being a huge support to me. Thank you to everybody who's in the description down below, and thank you to everyone who can even support $1 just on Patreon to help keep the content coming.